maybe if you want, you could just tell me a little bit about Ahold of Mold and your company, how it got started. I kind of remember you telling me a little story that you were in a different industry before you came here, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, so we started the business with a carpet cleaning company when I was in my 20s, you know. So we started with that, and then at that time I was in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay.
And Hurricane Fran came through in '96, and then we turned into a bit of water damage restoration contractor.
Okay.
And then after that large hurricane, we started noticing that a lot of commercial buildings and homes were not dried properly. That was pretty hot and heavy in '96. All the way through '97, we stayed quite busy in that industry. We were working with commercial buildings. Crabtree Valley Mall was one of them.
Okay.
And it was under 12 foot of water. So we had a lot of experience, starting from there. And then from there, we've expanded and moved into the Erie, Pennsylvania area, Buffalo, serve a lot of the Salamanca territory, and so yeah, that's how we originate.
So yeah, there's a lot of water then from a hurricane.
Yes.
And people were calling just to have carpets cleaned from water?
They were actually calling to have water extracted out of their basements.
Okay.
So we were in extracting water and trying to dry homes out.
Ugh.
And it was
a nightmare.
A nightmare, needless to say.
Yeah. I guess to start too, we can kind of give a little backstory on how I met you. So, my husband and I, we moved into a new house a couple years ago, and we had found a little bit of mold. When we first moved in, we had at the time it was under the previous owners because it was in transition, and so they chose who was going to remediate the mold. And the company that they chose, I didn't have a good feeling about, because I was like, they're coming in, they're just leaving everything exposed, and I just didn't have a good feeling about it. And I was right; it was not done the way it should have been done. But then after that, we all just kept having issues. All 6 of us, were having insomnia and this and that, and I could tell that there was something in there. And so quick Google search, and I found you. Then when your team came in, and I'm like, okay, they're doing it different than the other guys did it. This, I think, is, the right way to do it. Do you find that's, how much do you find when you're going to a job that somebody's had somebody in there before, or if they, didn't have the knowledge, I guess, or somebody who didn't take it seriously? Do you find that a lot in the industry?
Yeah, we do. You know, you have certain states like New York that regulate through the Department of Labor. Pennsylvania doesn't have those regulations. Then you get into Florida, they have regulations. Texas has regulations. So we just follow those guidelines set forth by those states that have those regulations, no matter where we're at. But then stepping into some of the areas, it's almost like the wild, wild west. There's just nothing that's monitored, and they just do what they want to do, and they can call themselves mold remediation contractors when they're not. And so we follow those strict standards set forth by the states.
That's unfortunate, because a lot of people don't know. They might do a Google search and get lucky, like I did. I found you guys, but sometimes they're just picking somebody who's off the internet. And how do you, I guess, if you're a consumer and you're having a problem, like what are some things you should look for in a company that?
Well, you definitely want to look for a state accreditation, or either IICRC, which is Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration certification. That's another good certification to look for. Other than that, if you don't have any one of those two, there's also another company called Normi, Normi, and they're another great institute, for the industry. But without having those, continued education, guys out there and following and making sure that you're up to par, with that continuing education, that's very important. And finding a reputable.
Yeah, because they're not all the same. No, I was shocked. I was completely shocked, because this was our first real, mold exposure. So I hadn't really gone through the process yet. But deep down, I'm like, I know what mold is, and this is not being taken seriously from what I could tell, anyways. And like I said, when we first started having these issues, I have 4 kids, so my husband and I and 4 kids. It was all 6 of us in the house, so we're having different health issues. But we were all having issues. At first, I thought, I think I told you right before we started this that I thought, well, maybe it's COVID, because we moved in right before COVID, and I'm like, well, either everybody's stressed or everybody's, you know what I mean? And so all these different things were kind of manifesting as different health issues. And it wasn't until actually that I went and saw somebody in functional medicine at Cleveland Clinic, and she looked at me and she's like, well, you have mold toxicity. I was like, dang, And at that time, it was before before we met your company. And so I thought, okay, it's from past exposure. It's from the company who didn't do it right, and it was exposed. And I thought, well, maybe I just need, detox. But we were all still having symptoms, and I was trying to detox, and it just wasn't happening. And I remember, I think you had mentioned to me too that you had an issue at one point.
Yeah, I did actually.
Yeah.
So I was on vacation for a short period of time, and then we went down to the Outer Banks for a week. I had a friend watching my house and my dogs, and he was drying some of his laundry, and I live in a ranch home, so my dryer vent was venting underneath the house to the exterior block, and somehow the dryer vent popped off, and it produced all of this, elevated humidity and moisture in my crawl space.
Okay.
So not going in your crawl space that often, that's not a place that you're going to open up once in a while to inspect. It's a crawl space. And so, I was sick for 6 months with a sore throat.
Wow.
And I'm a veteran, so I was going to the VA clinic and trying to get diagnosed with, what is going on here? And it's nothing. There's nothing wrong. And so eventually I just decided to run an air test in my house. And it came back surprisingly elevated.
Wow.
And so instantly I started looking where you look, sources of moisture. Where's the source of origin? So we tracked down the source of origin and I opened up the crawl space, and Penicillium aspergillus was hanging like stalactites from my floor joists, like hanging down.
Oh gosh.
And keep in mind, this is in my crawl space, and people think that, those crawl space areas don't share airspace with your home. Well, it does with mold.
Yeah.
Mold is so small, it can actually creep through those small areas and infiltrate in your property. And so we found the issue, and believe it or not, I called my guys in, and we had them set up negative air in the crawl space. And after 6 months of having a sore throat, 4 hours later, it was gone.
Wow.
Just by HEPA cleaning and filtering out all the air and pushing the exterior of the building and dumping all that air.
Wow.
And it just released all those symptoms that fast. Now, it doesn't happen that way with everyone, but in my case, being exposed to it for 6 months, that was scary, not knowing what was going on, but then finding it and then realizing we could deal with it that quickly was pretty cool.
Yeah. So it was literally a reaction.
Yeah.
They were having. My husband had the same exact reaction. I actually remember the one time that you came. So we had you back and forth all the time at our house.
We were there for a while.
So for the listeners who don't know the backstory, we originally called you guys, and you came out, and we started, like you said, you look for moisture, you look for water damage, you look for all these things. We didn't have a whole lot of that, we wasn't anything really that was visible. So here I'm thinking, like, what's going on? Am I losing my mind? And then it becomes like we're chasing a ghost, around the house. And it's like, it's totally the way it feels. And then we just started doing some air testing. And I remember you saying at one point when you were there, talking about that story and the sore throat. And I was like, my husband has had a sore throat for the entire time, and so it was kind of confirmation, like, okay, we need to keep looking because there's something still here. And so we did. We ran some some tests. Maybe you could talk to some of our listeners, if they're they're suspecting that there might be mold. Yeah. What are the different kinds of tests that you recommend for different?
The standard test is air sampling, air sample monitoring. That's where the CDC, the EPA, they like that testing method. There was a testing method called ERMI, which is basically DNA of mold. So they're going in and swabbing dust. And, that's not what we're breathing. We're not down at a baseboard, but it's a good indicator to tell if you possibly have mold in a home. But the air quality is basically the standard procedure. And what you're doing there is you're just taking the clean ambient air sample from outside and comparing it to that indoor air. So for example, let's just reference Penicillium aspergillus. That's one of the most common molds that we see. So if we were to go outside in an ambient air condition and measure, let's say 10 cubic meters of mold outside, and then come in your house and measure 100 or 200, we know there's a source of origin that's elevating indoors.
Yeah.
And so you have to have that comparative, that baseline, if you will. Yeah. There's other ways of testing, like Home Depot has kits that are just, they're hard to read because they're a Petri dish. And basically anywhere you set a Petri dish, eventually it's going to develop mold. And sometimes those can scare
have mold,
people.
Maybe even in manufacturing, and then you bring it into your house or something. Maybe it's contaminated. How do you know?
Yes, exactly. And so just air sample monitoring is really the standard protocol right now.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who's, saying, well, how accurate can that be if you're in the room and you're disturbing the air? Like, how do you, justify the accuracy of that when you're taking your air quality? Well,
you're going to use, looking at the building first, performing a visual, determining, if, where's their potential for higher elevation, for example, if we're using forward-looking infrared cameras or moisture counters to detect. If we see areas that are showing elevated moisture in areas, we're going to go to closer to that source. Otherwise, if we don't find moisture in homes, we typically would take air samples near cold air returns where you're getting that central vacuum, location, so you're getting that airflow pull through those areas. And also through surface testing as well. Anytime you see visible mold and you're running air samples, you always want to make sure you run a surface test to see if that's going to match what's elevated,
right.
Airborne.
And I remember when you were at our house, it seemed like you ran it for a long time collecting. It wasn't like you had it on for 20 seconds. It seemed like, we had left the room and you let it run for a while. So
yeah, so normally you run anywhere from 75 liters of air through these media cassettes to 150. And they typically take, anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, per sample in each area.
Yeah.
And
in that 10 minutes, you can get a lot of air.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And then once again, you're measuring that against that ambient air, and that's how
which I think that's basically how we eventually determined.
Yeah, it was.
That was because we didn't have any water damage. There wasn't. We were looking at every possible corner where every single pipe is in the house, and there was nothing. Eventually, I think you said, okay, well, tell me where you spend the most amount of your time. And at the time I'm like, okay, well, it's my office.
Yeah.
I sit at my desk and I have an office job. So my home office was where I spent most of my time, and took the air sample there and I compared it to the outdoors, and I think it was like thousands and thousands. It was so bad. And we never even suspected to look there because it was an area that was not anywhere near the plumbing in the house. And so, for those listeners who don't know, we ended up, my office is in a lower level of the house. So it's in the basement. The basement, we're built on a hill, so it's not completely underground. And so that was another reason why I didn't really suspect, because it's not, we have walkout doors and stuff, but the drop ceiling, apparently whoever lived in the house before us, that's where they used to store their old beer cans. Must have been a teenager bedroom, maybe, or a,
Yeah.
a something or other. And there was an obscene amount of garbage and
Right.
beer. And I thought to myself, geez, you can't make this up. Like, I would have never, that's not
who's
something.
Who's going to lift their suspended ceiling tiles to check out what's behind there?
Exactly. Especially if you know that there's no plumbing.
Yes.
Like, you're actually not. And when we bought the house, I mean, we had the inspector come, but we didn't pull down every tile of every, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To inspect. It wasn't something we looked for.
And then also, with suspended ceiling tiles being so hygroscopic, if that's not maintained in your humidity and, you just don't have a dehumidifier operating and keeping that humidity at this proper humidity level, that could have caused problems, prior to you guys moving in. So maintaining humidity is key.
Yeah.
In those situations, especially in basements in spring and summer months.
So it was, I mean, that air sampling was what did it, because we would have never probably suspected that it was my office, unless we would have taken that sample. So, I mean, that was key. And then, we did the remediation, and I was still, like, what in the heck? I'm still not. And so, called you back in, In hindsight, I probably should have just asked you to test the entire house when you were there. But I thought, well, we got it, right?
Yeah, we thought it was isolated to those areas.
Right, and then it wasn't. It was on another side. We found more, and again, it was, well, that one was actually visual a little bit too.
Oh, yeah.
On the floor joists, but that air quality testing, I mean, that's not something that we would have never found it.
No.
I think we would have never found that. I mean, who's looking in their drop ceiling for beer?
Yeah.
Moldy beer. Years and years worth of moldy beer. Like, nobody's doing that.
Yeah, it's just spilled out onto those tiles, and that's all it takes.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of moisture to come in contact with some organic building material, and 48 hours, 72 hours later, it's not dry. Then that's good. Scientifically proven it's going to happen.
Yeah. That leads me to another point, though. So if you want to, I guess, just talk a little bit about, where mold can grow and where it can't grow. Because, sometimes we're looking at places like, oh, is that mold? Is that mold? Is that mold?
Yeah.
And there's some places where mold's not going to grow, but some places it's very...
Right. So a lot of times we'll notice where customers are calling us in, they're seeing it on, vinyl windows. Mm-hmm. Typically that's mildew. Mold is going to develop on anything that can absorb moisture. But if you think of anything that can absorb moisture, plastic, rubber, glass, stainless steel, those are areas that mold's smart. Yeah. It knows where to grow, these little guys.
Yeah.
They know where to attach. And so that's where you're going to find mold would be on any material that can absorb moisture. And so you're always looking in those areas, especially basement foundations, around windows that could be leaking, around any plumbing in bathrooms. Dishwashers are a big one. They leak. You can't see back there. Just a little drip from time to time underneath, bathroom or kitchen cabinets under the sinks. We see it a lot there, but mainly basements, especially in Western New York area. A lot of the older homes with the old foundation basements and just water infiltration over the years, and it just takes its toll, and you'll start to notice mold developing, on the floor joist system above. Where most people call us in, they see discoloration on their walls, and the first place we'll start to look for is those areas where it can really develop. And so those are some of the most common areas that we'll find. Also attics that are improper. They're not properly ventilated.
If you get a leaky roof maybe or something too.
Leaky roofs, or, you have contractors that are coming in and overlaying over perforated soffit venting, which is supposed to vent, and they lay insulation over that, which obstructs any airflow from coming up, or they'll have soffit vents in tandem with gable vents and a ridge cap, which you either should have one or the other. But that's another big one. I mean, when you're not looking to your attic, how often you go up there? Maybe once a year to put the Christmas tree up, maybe or something, or so.
And that's a long time in between for stuff to grow.
Exactly, especially through the winter. You're having ice dams, that are building up and rolling down into wall cavities, and people don't know it.
No.
You're not going to hear that necessarily. Sometimes you'll see the water come through, and then you'll have ice dam and mold developing in wall cavities. And now with antimicrobial paints, that are on walls, they're mold and mildew resistant. So a lot of times that mold will just not come through. So you don't necessarily know what's behind there where that raw, dry paper is at. And it's in a very moist, dark environment. So we find a lot of problems in wall cavities where you just wouldn't expect because it looks clean from the face
from
side.
From the paint. Yeah, you wouldn't know. Do you find that there's, I guess, a bigger season for mold than others, or is it? I mean, we're talking about snow now and ice. I mean,
spring and summer.
Spring and summer.
Those are our biggest months we have the calls in, just due to the fact that a lot of homes are on the market. You have a lot of home inspectors inspecting homes, and then the winter, of course, people are firing up their furnaces.
Yeah.
And where are their furnaces? They're in the basement. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a HEPA filter in your furnace, that's a big problem. You're going to pull those pollutants through into your filter if it's not tight, and that can cross-contaminate into your whole entire house. Times
pipes bursting from cold, or
pipes bursting.
That's
that's one of the big ones, especially this blizzard we just had.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, it seemed like.
I remember talking to you at one point, and you're like, "Oh my gosh!"
Yeah, I think we had to turn down like 100 jobs in 2 days. Everyone had a burst pipe, and that was another thing. People could not get out. Restoration contractors could not get out to people's homes to dry them. So then, a week goes by, these homes developed mold. And unfortunately, because there was just a lack of, companies that could respond as first responders to dry these properties out.
And it doesn't take long.
Not at all.
For mold to pop up.
Exactly. Yeah. It needs to be the building material needs to be removed right away, the wet building material, and you have to have dehumidifiers set and antimicrobial to avoid, during the drying process to avoid that mold from developing.
Yeah, that's another good point. If you want to talk to me about what, remediation looks like. Say there's people out there, they've had the health issues or whatever, and they've suspected mold, or maybe they saw water damage, and then they did the air testing and it confirmed that they had mold. What does remediation look like, or what should it look like versus what done poorly? So
you brought up a good point, with people in their homes, they're referencing this as SBS, or sick building syndrome, And so when you have a building that consists of SBS, you have to set up containment, negative air pressure in these areas to keep them isolated. Otherwise, you're just cross-contaminating through the entire home. We see a lot of building contractors that will lock in moisture in a basement. For example, maybe they've poured concrete floor, hasn't cured yet, and then they'll put in windows on the back side of the basement, and they'll lock that moisture in. And first thing we're noticing is developing of mold on
it's a brand new home
floor joists in a brand new home.
Yeah,
and we've seen some horror stories like that. So those areas, you're setting up, once again, following state protocol, setting up containment, negative air pressure, making sure that those employees that are in the house are not cross-contaminating themselves. Yeah. So you're using Tyvek suits and clean exit chambers to decontaminate before they exit back out into a clean environment. Yeah. So you just keep those isolated as best you can.
Maybe explain what negative air pressure is.
So negative air, you're exhausting all of the air to the exterior of the building through laid flat ductwork. So you're normally going out a window and keeping that air tight. So when you're inside the chamber, everything is, of course, going to pull towards that interior or exterior wall and force that air outside. So there's just no possibility that any cross-contaminants or airborne particulates are going to go the opposite way. There's just no way for those to escape through that containment.
Keeping everybody safe. It's the workers, the
keeping
people
everyone
that are
safe.
there.
And then also, once again, the big word here is HEPA. That's all we talk about is, when you're cleaning mold down, you're vacuuming it away with true HEPA filters. I mean, a lot of people don't understand that you can go buy a HEPA filter somewhere and put that onto a vacuum, but that's still not a true HEPA vacuum.
Right.
It's just a filter that's still not sealed properly. So you actually have to use true HEPA to make sure you're vacuuming all these particulates down. Otherwise, they're just exhausting right back out of the vacuum into the airspace and causing a bigger problem than you had in the first place.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a good point too. I mean, there's so many different types of ways that people talk about air scrubbers or air cleaners or whatever, with mold. Hey, just plug this in and it'll, people are using all kinds of different technologies. And I printed some things out here because the EPA has put out a lot of good information on what is effective and what's not effective. And I hear people say, well, the UV is the way to go, the UV light. And I mean, the EPA says right here in their review, I'll put this in the podcast, but it says that some bacterial and mold spores are resistant to UV radiation. And to achieve reliable deactivation of spores, the lighting power would have to be very high and exposure times must be long. And then it says that it's UV radiation is ineffective in killing microorganisms if they proliferate inside. And so it's kind of like not everybody understands what kind of technology is most important when we talk about getting rid of. And I think that maybe is a good conversation to have too, the difference between, spores, there's mold spores, and then there's mycotoxins.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
we were just referencing that earlier. And so once again, it always comes back to HEPA. Make sure, those filters, nothing can really bypass those. That mold can't bypass those. And then when you're dealing with the mycotoxins, which, mycotoxins, anybody out there probably don't know too much about mycotoxins. It's mold's defense mechanism, for its
That's a
food
good way
source.
to put it. Yeah.
It's its defense mechanism. It's saying, hey, we're going to put out this force field and you other guys aren't allowed in here. And those mycotoxins are toxic and they are,
a lot of times those are what are really damaging for
those
people.
Are the most damaging to most people.
Yeah.
I mean, they're linking that to mental deficiencies and all sorts of other health ailments.
Yeah. And they're smaller.
It's way smaller.
Smaller than a spore.
Right.
And that's why we talk a lot with the Austin cleaners. I mean, because we have the HEPA, the true medical grade HEPA to capture like the spores. But then there's that carbon. We've got up to 15 pounds of granulated carbon and zeolite. And that's really, to help with the mycotoxins and stuff.
That's the only way you're really going to be able to filtrate out those mycotoxins is through those carbons, just not through HEPA.
Yeah.
And so once again, when I was referencing negative air, you can filter those out because you're pushing it all outdoors. But in a house setting, if you have that in, you need those carbon filters. Otherwise, it's...
Yeah, I had them all over my house. It's like a little maze of Austin filters all over the place. Yeah. So it's like, but that's what, it helped us tremendously. And those mycotoxins, they can be anywhere, right? They can travel.
They're gaseous, so
very insidious.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's troubling, when you think about it, really. Maybe we could talk about, say somebody is like, well, I don't know, they're on the fence about calling a remediation company, and they're like, well, it's mold, I can just take care of it myself. And you see all these DIY things online, and I always cringe. I'm like, no, don't do it. In your experience, talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how much do you see, people calling you after they've tried a failed DIY?
Most of the DIYs are
DIY.
Someone going into a store and finding a mold-killing chemical, which that's all it's doing. They're spraying it and they think, and now it's dead. It's dead. It's non-viable. It just can't reproduce, but it still produces its allergenic, toxigenic, pathogenic properties. It just can't reproduce. So, in those situations, that's why you have these state guidelines that we follow, making sure that you're not cross-contaminating. And that's what we see a lot of. We'll see guys come in and, with especially like Stachybotrys in people's homes. And they're just, they have some guys down there with no containment, no respirators, and they're just tearing it out, not realizing that they're causing worse damage than it was in the beginning.
And I lived through that. That's awful. I mean, we had a company that at the beginning before you guys, that's what they did. They came in and just tore it out, and there it is, all the black mold. And then they're like, yeah, we'll be back tomorrow. I'm like, whoa, you're not leaving my house right now. And they did. And I told my husband, I'm like, okay, how are we going to seal this off? And it was like this whole big thing. And I thought, man, am I crazy or what? Like, this doesn't seem right. This is so not right. Just leave it open, exposed to go wherever in the house. Right?
Yeah, there's another
it's not.
And there's a company that's setting it up like that.
Yeah, so. It was so not right. Yeah, not at all. So what do you we talked about? I just said we saw that black mold, but mold can be different colors, different. I mean,
the big mold that everyone's worried about, of course, because of Google and all. It seems to be black mold. It's toxigenic mold, but there's a number of different types of black molds out there. So they're not all toxigenic. Yeah. But you have penicillium, which is kind of a whitish, fuzzy, type mold. And that's one of the most common that we see when we're taking ambient air samples outdoors. And so you mainly will see, Penicillium aspergillus outdoors, and that's why you'll see it elevated indoors when it finds those moisture sources.
But a lot of people aren't looking for white color, right? No. I mean, they're not. They might be looking for the green or maybe the black, but they might be,
mostly the black. That's what strikes their attention is. Oh, there's black mold there, but Penicillium aspergillus, in excess of 10 square feet in your home, it can wreak havoc on people that especially that are allergic to that.
Yeah, I mean that was one of the things that we found in my house, and I mean myself and a couple of my daughters. So it's really, really bad for us. I mean, my one daughter has Lyme disease, so she's already immunocompromised, and we have the HLA-DR gene, so we don't detox biotoxins really at all. You know what I mean? And so we are, I guess you would call us bioaccumulators, So when we're exposed to these types of things, we accumulate them. We don't detox them. Yeah. So, there's all kinds of different ways that people do and do not get rid of these things. And I think that's sometimes too what makes it most confusing, is because we had a house of 6 people living in there, and it wasn't like everybody had a sore throat or everybody had itchy eyes. It manifested in so many different ways. And one thing that we all did have though is we all had sleep problems, which I thought was,
and that's another one. Sleep apnea. Big one there.
Everybody had insomnia. But again, it was like when COVID hit, so I'm thinking everybody's just like stressed maybe. The kids were doing remote school, and my husband and I were working from home remote, and I'm thinking, everybody's on a freaking Zoom at the same time. My internet's going to crash. Like, I'm thinking nobody's sleeping because everybody's stressed. But really, in hindsight, I'm like, that's probably it,
That's SBS. There you go again. Sick building syndrome. Yep. You have a house that's making you sick, and who would ever expect that to be the case? But it is.
And then everybody had, aside from the insomnia, everybody had different stuff, whether it's sore throat, sinus stuff,
and there you go.
Body
Once
pain.
Again, with certain individuals, their symptoms are going to differ from one to the other.
And so it's so hard to say, okay, well, everybody's suffering from mold toxicity, because you're looking for, if you're saying everybody's suffering from something, you're looking for that common denominator. You're looking for those similarities. And with mold, there just isn't usually, at least there wasn't in my house. And it's like, what is going on?
So, there's just another point, we just want to reference there regarding, testing air quality. And when we do test, we're not only looking for of course, mold, but we're looking for, are there water damage indicator molds like Stachybotrys and Chaetomium? Okay. We know then with those, especially those two, they're very common. we need to find, if we're seeing elevation there, we know there's water damage or
somewhere.
had prior water damage in a house.
Okay, yeah.
And it doesn't have to be active, but it could have been prior. And so
maybe you're looking for signs of water damage, but maybe the water damage is hidden.
Maybe the water damage is dried up. It was happened 10 years ago, but the mold developed due to that water.
And it's still just developing because it was never taken care of.
It's there. It hasn't been removed. And so those are, once again with Stachybotrys, can get you very sick if it's
that's a terrible mold. Right. Yeah, it's a terrible one for sure. In addition to some of the other types of, I guess, air cleaning technologies out there, I mean, there's all kinds of different ones. There's the UV, right? There's the PCO, there's the ionizers, there's, all these different technologies. It's hard, I think, in our line of work, we see a lot of misconceptions and a lot of confusion about what is, the best way to go. Obviously, the EPA says the most effective is the combination of HEPA and carbon. Those two combined have the greatest efficacy. But some of the other technologies, I think they're ozone generators. Do you see that a lot in your business when you come into a home and they have, I'm using this. It's my, and it's an ozone generator. I mean, from what very
toxic.
Yeah.
It's very toxic. I mean, you see on Weather Channel alerts, especially down south a lot, heavy ozone alert, So you're basically adding one molecule to oxygen to create O3, which is ozone that's heavier than air, and all it's doing is dropping everything down. So ozone works effectively in odor removal and water damaged homes. Like we will use it in homes that have just, musty odors have absorbed into that wood and you really just can't remove it. You don't want to gut the house out. So in those circumstances, we'll use those just for odor control. But then, of course, you're ventilating the property. No one can be in the property when they're running. I actually was with a client of mine a couple of years ago, and he had ordered something from China that he had plugged in his outlets in his wall, and what they were ozone generators, and he was running, and this was what he didn't have a mold problem. These ozone generators was making his family sick.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, because I mean it's a known irritant for people with asthma, allergies, COPD. I mean, it's a known lung irritant. I hear that all the time. I joined these, especially with the whole ordeal that we went through, I'm in these different mold Facebook groups and this and that. And I'm just shocked at the number of people who are purposely looking for ozone generators to get rid of mycotoxins or mold. And I'm like, guys,
yeah,
especially if you've got kids in the house or somebody with any type of breathing issue, or maybe it's even long haul COVID. Somebody had COVID a while back. They're still having trouble breathing. And now you got this ozone generator in your house trying to get...
It's complicating everything.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much misconception out there.
There was, without bringing up the company name online here, but there was a company back in the day that they sold ozone generators. And, they had a large lawsuit, and this is one reason they're not in business. And it was one of the stores you'd see at the mall that sold all the nice reclining chairs and massagers and foot massagers. And one of their main products was an air cleaning unit, which produced a lot of ozone, and it was making people sick. And that's why that company no longer exists. So, yeah.
You see it in schools. We've seen it, recently with, schools that are trying to improve indoor air quality, for whether it's COVID or sick building syndrome, sick school syndrome, and they've got these ozone generators in there. Maybe there's some states that, haven't mandated how you use funding, for these. So they'll go and they'll waste all this funding on ozone generator air purifiers. And then all of a sudden, all their asthmatic kids can't breathe in school. Their absenteeism is through the roof. And so this device that they bought to make things better actually just totally messed everything up. And so now you see them, they're in warehouses. They're, they spend all this money because they're in warehouses now because they can't use them. They're making everybody sick, you know?
It's just...
It's a shame that there's not more, I guess, information out there.
Information, for sure.
Yeah, it's just a lack of information. Yeah. And I think, with COVID, it's kind of, COVID hit and now everybody's an air quality expert, right? Like everybody's either an expert or they got a product. And I mean, we've been doing this since 1990. And so when we saw that, it was like, there's all these new companies popping up all over the place. And it's like, that's not a technology that I want to put around my family.
Right. And that's where your industry comes in great, because you understand, you know the size of the units that you need in a house. What's the square footage of your property? We know what you guys know what to do. The CFMs that are needed to take control of that. Because we'll see people and staging them in proper places too.
Yeah.
We'll see a lot of people that will just go to a store, order online, and you're ordering a unit that's really not effective at all for more than a walk-in closet, maybe.
Right.
So
yeah, you'll see them. They've got maybe they're plastic. Which if they're plastic, I mean, that for us is a dead giveaway right away, because I mean, how much filter material are you holding in a plastic unit? I mean, ours are steel-bodied because we need to hold up to 15 pounds of carbon and 60 square feet of HEPA. So I mean, that's why it's a steel-bodied machine, but. Yeah, you'll see the ones that are plastic, and then they have the little vent at the top, and so you're basically just getting this little mushroom cloud of clean air right over your purifier where no one's at. Like nobody's there. How is that even cleaning your room? But we have one exit vent on the side of our machines, and that's the whole point, like you said, is to push air in a circular motion. You stage it in a corner so that your exit vent is pushing air against the wall, and it's creating a vortex. So
vortexing that around.
You're pushing it constantly. And again, you see these they're so pretty and they're so cute and they're little, and I don't know.
That's a good point you brought up, though. I mean, that's the way when you're drying a building after water damage, you're going to force that air into a vortex motion. You want to make sure
make sure everything is
going to circulate and bring it back to its source, and continue to recirculate and clean that air down.
Yeah. Otherwise, everybody's going to have to gather around your machine like a little fireplace, right? It's like, it's not really doing a whole lot.
Not at all.
So, well, thank you for coming on and for talking to us today. If the listeners are interested, and maybe they're suspecting that they have water issues or whatever, and they want to get a hold of you, how's the best way to do that?
So once again, the name of our company is Ahold of Mold Environmental Services. We service Buffalo, New York, Erie, Pennsylvania. You can check us out on aholdofmold.com. Also, our phone number is 716-898-8143. And then our area office is 814-217-0695. So our website is probably the easiest way to get in touch with us. Once again, that's aholdofmold.com.
Okay, awesome.
And I appreciate you guys having us in today.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
All right.